Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you to descend into darkness with a chilling anthology of horror stories, each one inspired by true events. This is episode 3. Let the nightmare begin. The dealership at Dustpoint Road. This is a true story, a quite disturbing occurrence I had the misfortune to experience when I was at the impressionable and, mind you, easily frightened age of 7. The entire spectacle is centered around a road trip. This I must explain to you immediately so that I can tell you the background of the story. A month prior, my father had entered a contest. The contest was launched by a chain of failing gas stations in my area as a means of advertising. The concept was to distribute bumper stickers that bore the name of the gas station, which I recall as Iron Pump or something similarly cheesy. At the end of the promotion, the first person they saw on the road sporting one of these poorly crafted automobile accessories would be given free gas for a year. I suppose their intention was to make back their money with the free advertising, as they didn't expect anyone could use very much gas in 1 year. They obviously had no idea the kind of person my father was. As you can probably assume, he won the contest and was given a contract to sign, giving him permission to use all Iron Pump gas pumps free of charge for exactly 12 months. The very next day, my father, Grant, rented a tanker truck that is usually used to transport oil. Then my dear old dad set about emptying every single pump at our local Iron Pump into the truck. The attendants tried to stop him and, of course, threatened lawsuit. But my father was a smart man, albeit a filthy crook, and had found multiple loopholes in the contract that essentially allowed him to take as much gas as he wanted. The idiots hadn't specified a maximum. Now, our family wasn't very rich. My father was a genius, but he was lazy, and his law degree served the sole purpose of dust collection in his bedroom closet. Because we weren't the most frugal family in the neighborhood, we rarely went on vacations or family outings. So we were quite excited when Grant announced we'd be embarking on a nationwide road trip beginning next week. I could hardly contain my glee. The irony. So we set off in my mother Martha's disheveled Range Rover, an old piece of junk that worked once in a blue moon, and filled a trailer full of gas tanks my dad had filled up in the week preceding. We hitched it behind us. No more running on empty for this family. I remember packing not enough clothes and too many crosswords. I was obsessed with word games at that point. I had quite the vocabulary for someone who couldn't ride the teacups when the circus came around. It was about 4 days in that the car trouble started, and it was 4 hours in that the boredom began, so our irritation and my mother's poor excuse for a vehicle was only inflated by our restlessness. It got to the point that we'd stall out 3 or 4 times in 1 hour. It only took about 2 hours of this for my dad to lose what little patience he could fit into his mind. He concocted a plan that involved selling some of the extra gas we had brought along to passerbys and renting another car to continue the O'Reilly family outing extravaganza. "What about Mom's car?" I remember my little sister Sophie asking. My father chuckled and told of the glee it would fill him with to never have to see that piece of garbage again. My mother passively agreed. They, of course, implied by this that they would be abandoning the Mom Mobile. We eventually sold enough gas to rent a car. My scoundrel dad filled up half the tank with rocks to make more profit, so it wasn't difficult. A suspicious state trooper came by, asking what we were doing. He got a tremendously good deal, 2 tanks free. What a good person my dad was. We walked up to the car rental place, which was literally in the middle of nowhere. A dirt road on a flat plain that expanded to all visible horizons was the only other thing of interest, completely devoid of life. The first thing I remember about the rental place was that it reeked of something dead. We could smell this even before entering the property. I had to hold my shirt to my nose and clench my mother's hand extra tight. I felt a sense of uneasiness immediately. How was this rental place still open? All the cars were completely cloaked in dust. They looked as though they'd been there so long. I was surprised they hadn't eroded. The building itself was completely devoid of windows and looked to be a part of some prison complex. "Watch out," my mother said, as I almost tripped and fell on some rusty razor wire that was sticking out of the sand on the ground. "Hello," my dad called out. No answer, save for a rustling in the tall grass on the side of the road opposite the car dealership. "We need a car. Are you open?" "Why, yes, I am." My entire family jumped in unison, and even my headstrong father flinched instinctively. We all spun around to face a grinning salesman in an indigo blue press suit who was emerging from the grass on the opposite side of the road. There was a moment of tense silence. We were awestruck. Why was the sole employee of this rundown car dealership across the street? And there was something about his voice, something artificial that I couldn't quite put my finger on. We're looking to rent a car. Could you help us out?" The man didn't budge from his spot across the road, his legs still concealed by the tall grass. Come to think of it, he didn't budge from his expression either. He had sustained the same grin and widened eyes as before. Now that I had a moment to really inspect his face, he was downright unsettling. His hair was in such a perfect wave it looked like he had dunked it in craft glue and let it harden. His smile was stretched to a physically painful extent, and his eyes were watery from being opened so wide, so impossibly wide. I remember thinking how it was possible to tense the muscles of one's face so much and not physically shake. Then I noticed that his face was shaking. It wasn't noticeable at first, but his whole head seemed to be vibrating in the way someone's arm would who was clenching their fist as hard as they could. "Well, of you worse," the man replied. The way he said coarse, he modulated his voice throughout the final syllable, adding extra inflections so that it sounded more like "It's true what they say about a mother's instinct, for as soon as the man said this, my mother stood in front of my sister and me instinctively. I later asked her about this sudden protective stance, and she told me she hadn't thought about it all. Something inside her had known this man had the most despicable of intentions. "Okay, it's getting kind of troublesome to have to shout across this road. So could you come over here and we could discuss it face to face?" I've never seen someone's expression change so quickly. In the blink of an eye, his happy-go-lucky smile had whipped around into a menacing frown. This frown was stretched just as painfully wide as the grin, and his head shook with an intensity about equal to when he had been Mr. Happy Salesman. "No," he said very calmly. It sounded like "NEW. Please? This doesn't seem very professional." All of a sudden, the salesman punched himself in the face with full force. "Jesus," my dad exclaimed. At this point, my mom covered my sister in my eyes and walked us away from the man, so my memory of the dialogue from this point on is vague. But I'll try to remember some of what I heard. "Listen, we can just... It's not necessary to... Thwack." Presumably the man injuring himself again. Stop. Stop. 2 nights, 3, 50. That's fine, Keys family. Enjoy, rides well, but... Yeah, you too. I heard my dad's feet crunching on the dirt towards us. "NG, lunatic," he said under his breath. I also heard the jingling of keys, signifying my dad's success in renting a car from someone who was obviously mentally deranged. My mother's hand had been removed from my eyes at this point, but it made no difference as my eyes had been shut as tight as possible throughout the entirety of the debate, and I was going to keep them that way until we were out of sight of the dealership. I heard a car door open, and I stepped in and buckled up. My dad hooked on our trailer, started the car, and backed out. I thought I felt eyes on me, so I decided to open my lids instantaneously to make sure I wasn't being watched. It was one of the worst decisions of my life. For at that moment, my window was approximately 2 feet away from the salesman. I screamed in terror because his head was now undergoing tremors of impossible magnitude, his neck bending in ways I didn't think possible, sometimes whipping his head so far forward that it whacked upon my window. My dad gunned out of there so fast that the state trooper couldn't have morally accepted a bribe if he saw us this time. Being a child, I lived in the moment, and before long, my tears of fright had dried, and I had effectively forgotten most of the experience. I was now happily singing along to the wheels on the bus with my mother and sister, although we weren't joined by my father, who was having difficulty navigating our expedition. "Shut the hell up a minute, will you?" he cried in a frustrated rage. The car was immediately silent. "Martha, see if there's a map in the glove box." "Midla frickin' nowhere." My mother complied silently, but didn't get far in her quest, as the glove box turned out to be locked. It was locked not by a mechanism of the car itself, but with a physical rusted padlock that looked more ancient than my grandfather. My mom opened her mouth to relay her findings, but my dad saw it before she could open her mouth. "Oh, for the love of... Everyone look around your seats. The key's bound to be somewhere." And so we initiated our rental car Easter egg hunt, in which there was only one egg, and we were harnessed in place by seat belts that were too tight and chafed our necks. My sister was the one to find it, tucked into a slit in her seat's leather. It bore no markings. My mother hurriedly inserted it into the padlock, which opened with more ease than we imagined. She yanked it off, not realizing that her efforts to open the glove box earlier had technically opened it, and that the only thing really keeping it closed was the padlock. And so, onto my mother's fine linens, there fell jars upon jars of human appendages. Now, I remember identifying the body parts progressively during the duration of my mother's blood-curdling scream. So that is how I'll present my findings to you below. Both lines of dialogue happen at once. My mother: "Oh, good Christ. Good Lord. F asterisk asterisk asterisk. F asterisk asterisk asterisk. A fing God F. Me, inwardly. Fingers. Toes. Oh, that's an eye. More eyes. That just looks like red paste." Of course, I was screaming too, so it was mainly my subconscious mind that calmly separated the contents of the morbid jars into neat mental categories. So, by the time my mother was done assaulting our eardrums, I had a pretty good understanding of just exactly what was in those jars. And it's a good thing, too, because before my sister, who didn't see the jars because she was only 5 and was sitting behind my mother, could tell what the fuss was about, all 6 jars of human body parts were flung out the window with such speed that they could have been mistaken for Yankee candles. My father had kept his eyes on the road, so the only 2 people in the car who had any recollection of the contents of the jars were me and my mother. Me because I had made a subconscious effort to remember, and my mom because it was burned into her mind for eternity. This was helpful later when we had to explain to the police what was in there. One person could easily be mistaken, but 2 who saw the same thing were more likely to be taken seriously by the authorities. This rapid propulsion of the contents of the glove box out the window was succeeded by several minutes of terrified silence. Well, for my mother and I, my father was yelling with a ferocious anger, demanding to know what the hell that was all about. And my sister was doing the same, but with the cute, still developing language skills of a toddler who just wanted to know, "What happened, Mommy? Why'd thrown the window?" Eventually, we were able to communicate what we'd seen, and my dad calmed down enough to calm us down. He told us it was probably fake, meant to scare people, that the salesman was probably a practical joker of sorts. But to ease our simple minds, he would go to the police and get the car inspected to make sure there were no more spooky surprises lurking in our newly rented vehicle. Here's the exact list of items found by the police in our car, which they photocopied and gave to my dad, who gave it to me when I turned 18 as a keepsake. 2 legs, human, severed thigh, vacuum-sealed trunk. 4 containers of industrial-strength razor blades. Trunk. 3 vacuum-sealed plastic cubes of unknown meat, later found to be human fat, underneath driver's seat. 1 copy of unmarked book, poor condition, written in unknown language. They never figured out what it was, though some speculated Latin. 2 pints of human blood, taped under vehicle. This was the most disturbing part, as this blood lab tested positive for countless diseases: HIV, measles, mumps, and others that I don't remember how to spell nor pronounce. The vehicle was unregistered. When the cops got to the dealership, there was no sign of the man. Records showed that the dealership had been abandoned for 23 years prior, which explained the dust-coated cars, broken glass, razor wire, and why the car we rented was the only one not covered in dirt and grime. My dad now admits it was a stupid decision to rent from there. The K9 unit had dogs try and track the man's footprints, which looked promising at first, but they started getting farther and farther apart, mysteriously, and then disappeared into a lake. They closed our case when it became evident that no more was going to come of it. The police triple-checked with us to make sure the man had no way of knowing any of our personal information, and we confirmed that we never even told him our first names. To this day, that man's expression still haunts me, and I only buy from car dealerships, where you can see your reflection in the hoods. The silent one. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I've always been naturally sneaky. Without putting any effort into the endeavor, I was always scaring people, or at the very least making them jump. Sometimes even when I approached from the front, people wouldn't notice me until I was right upon them. Then they would gasp and flinch and ask me why I snuck up on them. I guess I'm just naturally quiet and unobtrusive. As I got into my teen years, I got better at it. I would be there one moment, and after looking away for a mere second or two, I would be gone. Or of course, vice versa, appearing seemingly from out of nowhere. A joke even began to manifest itself around my high school that I was related to usually the son of Michael Myers because of my seemingly preternatural ability to know the precise moment when someone was going to look away from where I was. Also, being named Evan didn't help any. I remember walking into anatomy class one day, 20 minutes late, and the teacher never even noticed. Neither did most of the students. And I didn't even try. I was late. Oh well, wasn't the first time and wouldn't be the last. I just walked in the door, set my books down, and sat in my seat. Having a last name near the front of the alphabet, I even had a seat in the front row. When the teacher finally noticed, she said something to the effect of, "Oh, I'm sorry, Evan. I had you marked as absent." She corrected her mistake in the attendance book and went on with class. It was around then that I began to actually practice this peculiar ability. We all know what they say, practice makes perfect, and boy did I ever get good at sneaking. In fact, I think I actually added new verbs into my repertoire. I excelled at sneaking and also creeping, sidling, slinking, and skulking. I actually bought and read a book on ninja techniques for hiding, diversion, and silent movement. I even went as far as to rent and watch all the old Halloween movies, so I could study how Michael Myers actually did his silent creeping, despite him being a fictitious character from a movie with all the benefits of special effects and camera trickery. Every October, I volunteered to work in the local haunted house, and whatever room they placed me in was routinely noted by customers to be the scariest in the entire place. At some point, I acquired a certain pride over my ability, happy that I was able to do something that few, if any others, could not. To say the least, I had gotten pretty proficient at this odd, God-given talent. I know what you're all probably thinking. At some point, I'm going to begin using my stealth abilities to go on some sort of rampage, stalking and dispatching my enemies in terrifying, horror movie-worthy murders. However, I am a peaceful and non-violent young man, and had no designs with my ability for anything more than occasional benefits and harmless practical jokery. This preface concerning my ability is essential if one is to believe the veracity of my story, which happened a few years ago. I don't recall the exact day or date. I believe it was either Tuesday or Wednesday. I was still living with my father as a poor, but working 20-year-old on the corner of our street, in literally the corner of our exurb, bordered on three sides by a nice forest that went for a few miles before running into the lake. It's not like we lived rurally or anything, but our section of town was pretty secluded and out of the way. I returned home after work on the night in question, exasperated and ready to relax. My pops wasn't around, which wasn't odd. He often spent long nights down at the bar with some of his old union pals. I unwound for a while, enjoying the freedom the empty house presented, playing my tunes as loud as I desired, and smoking like a chimney. After I deemed I had enjoyed a sufficient amount of recreation, I settled down and prepared to actually get some things done. Seeing as how there was a full load in the laundry basket, I grabbed it and headed for the basement where the washer and dryer were located. While I was younger, I hated going into my basement. Like any other unfinished basement, it's dark, it's musty, it's stone cold and hard, and there are innumerable shadows and places for all nature of dark beings to hide. Plus, when going down the steps into my basement, you're walled in on both sides until you reach the very bottom. So there's no way to see what manner of ghosts or monsters may be lurking down there, waiting to jump on you and rend you to pieces. As time went on, however, that irrational fear began to fade until it might as well have been a ghost itself. So, basket in hands, I had decided to make the trip to the basement as stealthily as possible, always proud to use and practice my ability, especially when hindered in some way, carrying something, noisy clothes, creaky floorboards, etc. Quick, deliberate steps, careful to distribute as much of my weight across as much surface area of my foot as possible. Always planning toe first when going downstairs, I was successful in descending the basement steps silent as the grave, even skipping the third to the last step because there was simply no way to put weight on said stair without it making a creak of some kind. A diversion or additional ambient noise would be needed to use that stair without spoiling the effect. No need to turn on any lights. Although it was well after 8 p.m., the summer sun was only starting to dip below the tree line, filling the basement with streams of auburn light falling in from the few windows. Besides, this was a stealth mission, no lights allowed. When I got to the bottom step, though, I froze. Since I had made absolutely no noise on the way down, it was easy for me to recognize odd sounds coming from the basement. Just around the corner, to the right, the left was just more wall. Nothing loud and overpowering, just a low, gruff sort of grunting. There were other noises as well, accompanying the grunting, a soft kind of scraping maybe. The noises conjured visions of one of those gremlins from the movies of the same name, trying to push a huge, heavy trunk across the floor, little by little. I wondered if perhaps my dad was the source of these sounds, but that didn't make any sense. He certainly would have heard me jamming earlier, and he absolutely hates it when I crank on my tunes. It's not like him to refrain from coming upstairs and telling me to knock off the racket. And what would he be doing down there for hours anyway? So if it wasn't my father, it had to be some critter from the woods that found its way in and was probably trying to make off with some food it had found. Many animals are known for their ability to hear and smell far better than us humans. I wondered if perhaps I were good enough in my stealth abilities to sneak up on an animal that was probably very aware of its surroundings, seeing as how they can be eaten or any number of horrible things if they're not observant and alert at all times. It presented an interesting challenge to my strange skill. So I clenched my jaw, tensed my muscles, and prepared to make the attempt. And once again, I froze. The weird sort of grunting became a vocalization of a different sort and louder. It sounded like actual words being spoken, albeit in a language I couldn't comprehend. However, it still sounded as if it were a gremlin making the noise. Or, at the very least, some old crone who smoked 3 packs a day. The language itself was intriguing. It sounded a lot like Latin or something similar, but definitely was not. After a few moments of genuine interest, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I was too preoccupied with my musings to realize something. This was no animal. There was a person in my basement. A person who was doing God knows what other than speaking in tongues? What the hell was going on down there? My heart rate instantly doubled, but being a strapping, macho young man, even with no one around, I wasn't about to let myself be scared by some strange old foreign woman, or whoever the hell had broken into my basement. It was then that I got a little angry. How dare someone break into my house? This was where I lived. What kind of dirtbag would just break into someone's house? Right about the time my nape hairs and goosebumps had retreated to their normal positions, A new sound began emanating from the basement, this one louder, but completely alien to me. I had never heard anything like this before in my life, or since, and describing it proves difficult. It was something between a powerful gust of air and a high-pitched, metal scraping on metal sound, both occurring simultaneously. That's the best I can do, and trust me, whatever sound you've conjured in your head to imitate it most likely doesn't come close. Seeing as this was the only time in my life that I've ever heard the noise, I may not even remember it correctly. All I know is this sound scared the bejesus out of me. Strapping young man or not, this unnatural sound went right through my ears, bypassed my brain, and cut straight to my spine, unleashing a cold rush within me and freezing my limbs in place. My eyes gaped wide, and I'm pretty sure my eyelids were non-existent at this point, because I cannot bring myself to shut them or even squint a little bit. The sound happened and quickly faded, but still here I stood on the bottom landing of the basement steps, still unable to see around the corner into the rest of the basement. Thankfully, whatever was on the other side of the wall couldn't see me either. I hoped. Standing there doing my very best statue imitation was not easy at this point. Sweaty palmed, breath firmly imprisoned in chest, eyes as dinner plates. I think it was about then that I began to actually fear for my safety, and I wished I hadn't been holding that goddamn closed basket. It was also about then that that weird language began again. Deliberate, but incomprehensible words. After a few more moments of listening to this infernal monologue, my curiosity simply got the better of me. All fear aside, I simply had to see what was happening in my basement on the other side of the wall. And so I exhaled as quietly as I could, drew in another deep breath, and noiselessly, slowly began to lean forward. Little by little, more and more of the basement was slowly revealed to my personal panorama. First, the old 8 million pound tube TV that should have been thrown out decades ago. No mysterious guests so far. Next, the workbench further back, tools in place and undisturbed. No monsters, ghosts, or creatures there. Then, towards the back corner, the washer and dryer, undisturbed and silently standing sentinel in their normal place. And next, holy shit, as quickly and silently as a ninja's ghost, I re-straightened my spine, standing upright and stock still. If my eyes were like dinner plates before, they were as satellite dishes now. I had seen it. I had seen what was speaking in that unnerving voice in my basement. But what exactly had I seen? It was humanoid, bipedal, and crouched down near the ground. I didn't get too good of a look at it since I shot straight back out of sight before IT saw me. When the hell was that? If that was human, that was one hell of a costume. All my initial S-being had yielded was a purplish-reddish ball of fur covering a vaguely human body, crouched low near the ground, and speaking in that horrid tone and cadence. Whatever it was, I had never seen anything like it before. I wasn't sure if anyone had. Seems my odd skill did come in handy, because if it heard me or detected my presence in any way, it did not display it. Although I couldn't see it, the monstrous chanting never slowed, stopped, or even broke cadence, leading me to believe it hadn't noticed my sweating, shaking presence. Listening closer to what it was saying, it was clear these were definitely words, and not just some strange guttural groans or random, atypical vocalizations. This thing was speaking with purpose, with a defined goal on its mind that it was seeking to accomplish. But of course that inspired the questions. Who was it speaking to, if anyone, and what did it want? Almost instinctively, I began to slowly lean forward again. I was pretty positive this thing wasn't ordering a pizza or lilting one of its favorite tunes. If I wanted any hope of determining what this thing wanted, I needed to know more about just what the fuck it was. The thing had its back to me when I peeked the first time, so that I couldn't see the face or any details about its front. I hadn't leaned out far enough the first time to even see its head anyway. Slowly, inch by inch, and silent as the grave, I again leaned out past the wall. Here we go again. The old tube TV. The sun was steadily finding its way below the horizon, ceding space to the lengthening shadows. Then the workbench. Every inch I leaned seemed to add decibels to the wild incantations the thing was spitting out. Now the washer and dryer. Muscle strained, adrenaline pumping, and then purple-red fur, including a blood-red tail. Fuck me. A tail. Again, on instinct, I straightened back out. Fuck balls. Okay, so it clearly wasn't human. I needed to stop ducking back behind the wall and just person up, unisex version of man up, so I could get a look at the intruder in my basement. Damn it. I wished again that I hadn't been holding that fucking laundry basket. My spine had seemingly just reformed itself into solid matter again when the chanting stopped, and that horrid metallic wind noise began again, remelting my spine and causing my heart to beat so hard I was afraid the thing on the other side of the wall might hear it. After what seemed like hours, but surely was only a minute or two, the wind/metal noise stopped. And predictably, the vicious chanting and dreadful scraping resumed. I should have went back up the stairs when I had a chance, but was compelled to get a firm look at this being. I mean, how often does one discover a previously unheard of creature making noise in their basement? Was it aggressive or amicable, benign or dangerous? And what the fuck was it doing in my basement? Was it a demon? An animal? A mythical creature of some kind, like a little violet and red Sasquatch? I had to know. And so, with courageous curiosity beating out debilitating fear, I began to lean out once again. You know the drill. Old TV. Should have been thrown out years ago. Workbench. Looks like Dad could use a new crescent wrench. Washer and dryer. Would I ever get to do the load of laundry? Sweatily clutched in my arms? And finally, it came into view. Wispy red fur, leading to a slender, slightly curved and motionless tail. The blood-red crimson of its tail darkened into various hues of violet and purple, deepening in color as it got closer to the torso. It was crouched on its two legs, indeed bipedal, and had a wild mane of shocked, wispy red and purple hair coming off its head in an Einsteinian sort of afro, only with longer strands than the deceased German physicist. The hair was clumped in places in dread-like protrusions that ran down the back of the body, giving the appearance of spikes running down its spine and the back of the arms. Its body was slender but wiry, and all of it that I could see was covered in that same blood-red fur that descended into a deep violet as it got closer to the center of the body. The feet were furred up onto the very tips and kind of resembled a cat's paws. It was completely still except for movements it was making with its hands, or forepaws, or claws, or whatever the hell it had, and small undulations with its head coinciding with its wicked-sounding cadence. It was impossible to say for sure, but it looked like if it stood up, it would be about my height, 6 feet 2 inches, give or take a few inches. I watched it for a little while, my fright-induced adrenaline enabling me to hold stone still, whilst this being went on about its surely nefarious business. The oration and scraping were simple enough to figure out, but even through my fear, I was very curious about what that metallic whooshing was about. I leaned out just a bit farther, as far as I would dare, in hopes of getting a look at what, if anything, this creature was crouched over. Whatever it was, it had to be pretty small because the slender being greatly obscured what it was crouched over. All I could obtain during this time were quick glances of an indistinguishable black object. The chanting itself became more haunting and sinister on this side of the wall, sounding as if there were 2 or 3 beings speaking in unison. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might literally leave a bruise on my chest, and I noticed for the first time that I had such an absolute death grip on the laundry basket that the plastic edges were digging painfully into my hands. My breath was shallow and silent, and I was pretty sure my eyes hadn't shut even once in the past 3 to 5 minutes. I watched in graveyard silence, undetected, while this being went on about its work. Before much longer, it stopped all movement, the scraping and vocalizing again ceasing. Without warning or preamble, the creature raised both arms above its head. In that time, I could see that its hands and fingers were furred as well, except the palms, and colored in that same dark crimson as the tail and feet. Its fingers were human-like, with opposable thumbs, but there was one very defining characteristic. The index or pointer fingers on each hand were extraordinarily long. They were at least twice as long as the other fingers, and furred only about halfway up, with long black protrusions jutting out of the red fur. At first I thought they were fingernails, but they were pliable and appeared jointed like a normal finger, a normal human finger anyway. They were very fine and slender, ever so slightly curved, pointed at the tip, and looked like they were probably very sharp. The appearance of the sinister-looking claws did not do well to reconcile my mania. In addition to its size, this creature also came equipped with features that would enable it to seriously injure or kill me. And all I had was this fucking laundry basket. I didn't even have my pocket knife on me. I suppose I could have used a pair of knee socks like nunchucks, but I doubt a parroted ninja weapon would be much use against those claws. It was all a moot point anyway, because almost immediately after raising its arms, I forgot to mention that it raised its arms in a crisscross fashion because those claws kind of took precedence at that moment. It brought them down again, uncrossing them as it did, and producing that whooshing noise, a process which it repeated over and over again. It also abraded its claws together as it swept its arms downward, which produced a high-pitched, metallic scraping noise. Being able to see the thing also added a new phenomenon to the mix. As it brought its hands downward, the abrasion of its two claws appeared to create some kind of energy, evidenced by a reddish glow emanating from the hands. The glow grew more and more intense with each X-shaped swipe of its talons. After a dozen or more repetitions, its hands were barely visible, with dark red auras, resembling crackling clouds of crimson smoke surrounding its hands. When it finally stopped, I could perceptibly feel the energy coming from its hands, like it was creating a soft wind or gently pushing against me. Not enough to move me, but enough to be perceived. You'd have to experience it to truly understand, but it felt nasty somehow, almost viscous or slimy. It placed its hands on the small black object in front of it. I still couldn't tell what it was, and resumed its perturbing incantations. At this point, I was completely lost. Mentally, I had nothing, which isn't far removed from normal, and all I could do was stare, wide-eyed and gaping. Shock, fear, and amazement all amalgamated into a single 1,000-pound medicine ball being bounced around my head, replacing my normally functioning brain. With no activity going on up top, my eyes and muscles decided I was to keep standing there like a lump and see what happens. I found out later that my fight or flight instincts didn't fail, but simply didn't activate because the creature didn't know I was there, and choosing one of those options would have alerted it to my presence. Thank you, instincts. The incantations were really creeping me out. I desperately wanted to see what it was crouched over, feeling that this bit of information was immediately valuable to my well-being. I would swear that the creature was saying the words louder than before, and as it went on this time, its voice definitively began to rise. The increase in noise gave me the little fortitudinal boost I needed to attempt stepping out and peeking at what the creature was crouched over. With great care, I took a single noiseless step out onto the concrete floor, still gripping the ridiculous basket of clothes. With wide, probing eyes, I slowly leaned further, just a tad bit more in, and a sock fell out of the tilted basket in my hands, crashing softly to the floor, mere centimeters from colliding with the creature's foot. My muscles, every last one of them, tensed and froze. I quietly cursed myself in my head, and when I say quietly, I mean even my inner monologue whispered, out of fear of being heard by the mysterious monster in my basement. I was now so close to it that I could detect an animalistic scent, somewhere between a lush, sweet forest breeze and the slight stink of a rotting carcass. The creature seemed oblivious though, and after ensuring nothing else would jeopardize my stealth, I prepared to take the final step that would afford me a view of what the creature was crouched over. I was successful, and it afforded me a view of what the creature had in front of it. 'Twas a kitten. That's right. It was a little black kitten lying motionless on the floor. It looked dead to my eyes, and its fur was matted with blood. More blood than this little kitty could have possibly contained. Its entire coat was absolutely smattered with it. I knew this kitten. It had belonged to a family a few houses down. It was part of a litter their full-grown tabby had just had. It was the only black one of the bunch, and it had died a week or so after being born, the family knew not how. By what manner this goblinous being had come to possess it, I knew not how, or why. The absurdity of the situation I found myself in seemed to know no bounds. The creature's hands were still illuminated with those snapping clouds of crimson energy, and it was moving them all about the dead kitten, almost like a magician would before doing a sleight of hand trick. The light and energy given off by its aura-enclosed hands was sickly and felt dangerous, but at the same time was beautiful and mesmerizing. It was a strange juxtaposition to experience. I wasn't sure, but I felt like the energy that this being was manipulating could greatly harm me, or possibly be amazingly beneficial. Kind of like fire. Applied correctly, its uses are virtually endless and remarkably beneficial. But it can also be exploited for very dire and horrid purposes. In retrospect, I feel like the power this being was utilizing could be employed in a similar fashion. This monstrous, demonic-looking creature looked apparently ready to use such energy. At this point, I began to wonder, should I try to stop this thing? It didn't seem to be up to anything cataclysmic, like the destruction of the earth or the enslavement of all mankind. I like to think such things cannot be accomplished with some energy, albeit of an unknown origin, and a dead kitten. But all I had was my feeble human musculature and a fucking laundry basket full of clothes. This thing probably had all the agility and ferocity of a mountain lion. As movies and comics have taught me, all creatures of this manner do. Not to mention it had either stayed hidden for however long it had been alive, or had killed anyone who had ever seen it before. Not promising prospects for my future. This had been foolish of me. There was no way to know there would be a frightening monster doing God knows what to a dead kitten in my basement. But it had been my decision to investigate further. That was just stupid. I should have tried to creep back up the steps to call the cops, or grab a weapon, or anything other than sneaking up on an unknown monster that could surely do horrible things to me. So there I was, standing there sweating, heart pounding, mouth agape, eyes open wide, less than 2 feet from a previously unseen creature, holding a full laundry basket. Fear and common sense finally won out over curiosity, and I made the decision to try to sneak back upstairs. As I just started to slowly creep my way back to the landing, the creature's steadily louder orations began to crescendo, freezing me in place again. It flung its arms wide, hands still surrounded by the reddish purple auras of energy it had conjured, and almost giving me a Charlie horse. As it spoke its final indecipherable word, its voice now channeling Mum R.A. from the Thundercats cartoon, it thrust both hands, grabbing onto the kitten, transferring the red auras from its hands to the deceased catling. It seemed to be exerting itself, the bloody corona engulfing the kitten, swirling and billowing, and almost seeming to crackle with actual miniature lightning as the creature gently held its hands to it. I began to question my own sanity at this point. This situation I was in was getting more and more bizarre, almost as if I were dreaming. Just when I thought nothing stranger could occur, it would, pushing my heart rate and my sanity closer to the brink. I really have no idea how I didn't go running for the hills screaming bloody murder at this point. I guess I was literally too scared to run for my life. After a couple centuries passed, mere seconds I'm sure, the glow from the aura faded and eventually winked out. The creature removed its hands from the kitten slowly, and to my surprise, did not resume the chanting. This entire situation had blown all of my assumptions out of the water at every turn. So I decided not to make any, and just watch. My brain must have secretly made assumptions without my approval, because I was stunned once again when the demonic-looking being began to speak again, only this time softly and directly to the kitten. It was practically cooing to the little creature. And even more amazing, the kitten answered back. It began to mewl softly, its tail lightly thumping the concrete. A moment later, it stood up, and, unless my eyes deceived me, it was no longer covered in blood. It took a few shaky steps, then proceeded to meow lovingly at the strange monster that had just resurrected it. Well, that was a relief. I half expected it to eat the kitten, or rip it apart, or turn it into some giant dire monster cat, or something. It was such a relief, in fact, that I let out a loud and exasperated sigh, fully alerting the creature to my presence. Crap, the creature whirled immediately, and I finally got a look at its front and face. Especially the face, for when it turned around, it was right in my face, and it shrieked an unholy roar at me. Its face was leonine, especially with its wild red and purple mane of dreads, and the mouth and snout were protruded, further resembling a mutant jungle cat. It had fangs at the front of its jaw, top and bottom, with smaller fangs behind it forming a row that dove far into its mouth, which was spread wide as it roared at me, its hot breath like wind blown over a fire. I was close enough to notice horrid-looking bits of who knows what amidst the teeth and strands of saliva. It didn't roar for long. It wasn't a drawn-out, Omnitrix-own-the-world roar, but more of a primal scream. It took a wild swipe at my torso with a hand and one of those massive claws. But luckily, on pure instinct, I flinched. I raised the basket full of clothes, effectively parrying the strike, which was lucky because the basket received one hell of a gash. Also lucky was what happened next. It left. After the wild swipe, the creature made another noise, a more confused sounding noise. In a flash, it turned, and on a combination of bipedal and quadrupedal movements, it almost instantly galloped / ran / leaped its way to the back wall by the washer and dryer. And amazingly, it didn't stop there, for as it made its way, its hands began glowing red again, and it jumped at and into the wall, red aura-ed hands outstretched towards said wall. A moderate dark red explosion occurred, leaving a large cloud of crimson fumes. And when the scarlet smoke had cleared enough to see, there was no trace of the wild creature. I stood there dumbfounded. No, more than dumbfounded. Flabbergasted. There was the possibility that the thing would return, try to claim the life of possibly the only eyewitness to its existence. But I just stood there. I eventually turned the clothes basket in my hands to see the long gash the creature had left in its side. The basket had a long wound ripped through one side. Some of the clothes were even ribboned too. The kitten was exploring the basement, mewling along oblivious, as if it hadn't just been brought back from the dead by an unknown monster, who just jumped through some kind of teleportational vortex, or whatever it had just utilized to leave my basement. I scooped the little feller up, threw him in the basket, and went back upstairs, mouth still agape. When I told my dad what had happened, he asked me for the number to my dealer. He also said we couldn't keep the cat. It worked out. I ended up giving it to my sister. There was no way I was just going to drop off a kitten that had just been resurrected by a strange being at the Humane Society. If the thing grows up to be a monster demon cat, it's my monster demon cat. She agreed to take care of the little guy. I tried to tell her the story of how I came to possess it, and my sister reacted in much the same way as my father. I figured she ought to know, considering the cat could turn out to be something sinister. And although she wasn't as skeptical as my father, I could tell she didn't believe me either. I didn't really expect her to. After that day, I spent considerable time searching online for any sort of link or connection to what I had just gone through. Everything I found was scant and vague. No pics, no stories, no nothing that even scarcely fit the description of what I had experienced. While researching the creature online is how I came across creepypasta, actually. All I know is this: my sister still has the cat. He hasn't turned into any monstrous beings or exhibited a strange reddish glow. And I am stealthier than a silent ninja fart, for I snuck up on something that comes from the dark, hides in the shadows, and goes bump in the night. And I scared IT. The Shadow in the Basement. This is a story from my childhood, one which I have not told anyone except for my wife. Just thinking about it still sends shivers down my spine. I grew up in a small house with just my mother. It was a nice little house with 2 bedrooms upstairs, a small living room and kitchen on the main floor, and a basement where I kept all of my toys. The basement had a small storage room in the back, lit by a single light bulb. It wasn't until I was 7 years old that I started to get scared to go down there. It was a dark, rainy night as I played with my Legos in the basement. Rainwater slowly dripped through the window and down the cement wall. It was cold down there that night, more so than usual. I was wrapped up in my hoodie and a blanket as I played. While attempting to build an airplane out of my Legos, I suddenly got a chill down my spine, followed by the overwhelming feeling of being watched. I turned and looked behind me toward the dark storage room. Something drew my attention to the room, but I couldn't see what it was. It seemed darker than usual. I didn't think a room could get that dark, especially with the lights on in the room adjacent to it. It almost seemed like there was something in there drawing away all of the light, sucking it in like a black hole. I stared into the darkness at seemingly nothing until I saw something move. I didn't know what it was, but it seemed even darker than the room. I saw it for just a second before it disappeared. As it did, I could see lights slowly start to trickle into the room. This terrified me, so I ran upstairs to the living room to seek comfort from my mother. When I told her what I had seen, she just told me that it was my mind playing tricks on me because of the heavy rain outside. I went to bed that night, not thinking much about what had happened in the basement. I lay back in my bed and closed my eyes just like on any other night, and I fell asleep rather quickly. Although I fell asleep like it was a normal night, the night was less than normal. I woke up that night with the feeling of being watched. I opened my eyes to see nothing but darkness. I couldn't even see the light from the street light outside of my window. Thinking that maybe my blinds were closed, I looked across my room for the soft green glow of my alarm clock, but it wasn't there. At that moment, I realized that this was a lot like the darkness I'd seen in the basement, and that scared me. My fear doubled in an instant when I thought I saw movement in the darkness. In my terror from seeing that there was something in my room, I pulled my blankets over my head and screamed. In the midst of my screams, I heard my door open and the soft call from my mother. As she sat down on my bed, I slowly pulled my blankets off from over my head and looked around my room. The light had returned to my room, and I could now see the soft glow of my clock blinking at 2:17 a.m. and the light from the street light outside my window with my blinds fully open. My mother asked me what was wrong, and I told her what had happened. Reassuringly, she told me that it was just a nightmare and to go back to sleep. She gently kissed my forehead and left my room, closing the door behind her. It was hard for me to fall asleep after that, so I just watched my clock slowly tick away the minutes. This went on for about 2 or 3 months, staying at this level of activity. Nothing more than the feeling of being watched in the darkness. However, that all changed on Halloween night. It was a typical Ontario Halloween night, cold, windy, and rainy. I had returned home that night from trick-or-treating with my mom at about 8 o'clock and went down to the basement to play with my toys for a bit before bed. I could hear the rain tap against the basement window and the wind whistling as it blew between my house and my neighbor's house. Something was unsettling in the basement that night. more so than usual. As I played, I thought I heard sounds coming from the storage room, but every time I looked there was nothing. This was nothing strange to me, as it's been happening for the last few months. So I continued to play. I played for about 10 minutes when the power suddenly went out, and that's when everything changed. As soon as the power went out, I heard more movement from the storage room behind me. I immediately looked behind me to see a quick flash of red light, and then darkness. As I stared, I could hear footsteps from the dark room, but I could see nothing. The footsteps slowly made their way toward me, the darkness somehow getting darker as they approached, until they suddenly stopped. I moved my eyes around the room, careful not to move any other part of my body, in fear that whatever this was would see me. I looked around the room, trying to see what this thing was, but I could see nothing. It was so dark I couldn't even see my feet. I wanted to run upstairs to the safety of my mother, but I was frozen in fear, so I didn't move a muscle or even breathe. I sat in silence, listening for whatever was in the room with me. I couldn't hear a sound, not even the rain on the window or the wind between the houses. As I listened, the hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood up on edge, and I got chills down my spine. And that's when I heard it. A deep voice whispered into my right ear, "You will be mine, Ethan." I instantly screamed and ran to the stairs, tripping on toys along the way. I made my way up the stairs and through the door to the living room, slamming the door behind me. I ran to my mother, crying, and she held me, not knowing what was going on. I told her what had happened, but she just told me that my mind was just playing tricks on me again. What I had heard was just the wind, but my mind exaggerated it because of the darkness. From that moment in the basement, no matter what my mother said, I knew that whatever this thing was, it was real. From then on, I refused to go into the basement alone. In fact, I didn't like going into the basement at all. The activity in the basement itself settled down a little bit, because I was never alone down there after that incident. But I still had trouble sleeping. I would wake up at night with the feeling of being watched, to see nothing in my room but darkness. I would lay there staring into the darkness with my blankets pulled up to my neck, hoping there was nothing there. But after a few minutes, I would hear that same voice again. "You're mine, Ethan." The second I would hear that voice, I would pull my blankets over my head and scream, causing my mother to run into my room. And every time, she would say it was just a bad dream. This sequence would go on at least twice per week, until August of 1998, when the activity escalated yet again. My mother had been dating her now husband for a while now, and we were preparing to move into his house. I was going to be on vacation for 2 weeks in Quebec with my grandparents, as my mom moved our things into the new house. But what happened my last night in that house still terrifies me to this day. I had fallen asleep easily that night, excited to be leaving on vacation the next morning, but the rest of the night would not be so easy. I woke up again that night, this time to the sound of breathing. I opened my eyes to see nothing but darkness yet again. Thinking that my mother was in my room with me, I called out to her, "Mom," but what answered was definitely not my mother. It was that deep voice yet again. "Your mother is not here. She can't help you, Ethan. You're finally mine." I continued to stare into the darkness, thinking that it was my imagination, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see the silhouette of that dark figure standing at the end of my bed. I immediately pulled my blankets over my head and screamed, but my mother didn't come. I felt pressure on the end of my bed, as if someone was sitting on it. I screamed again. Suddenly, I felt something grab onto my ankle under the blankets and pull. I somehow managed to turn onto my stomach and grab the end of my mattress, but it only gave me a few seconds before it shifted, and I was pulled right out of my bed. I continued to scream, louder than I had ever screamed before. Finally, I could hear my mother get out of bed and make her way to the door. Only this time, when she reached it, the door did not open. The entity continued to drag me toward the door as I continued to scream. I could hear my mother pushing against the door, trying to get it open without success, as it dragged me across the carpet. I tried to grab onto anything that I could, but the only thing that seemed to work was the foot of my bed. I stopped as I took hold, and I finally stopped moving toward the door. I could feel the entity begin to pull harder, hard enough to lift my body off of the carpet. But I managed to hold on. As I fought the entity, I could hear my mother struggle with the door. It took my mother a good 2 or 3 minutes to finally get the door open. As the door finally opened, light returned to my room, and I no longer felt the grip on my ankles. I fell back to the carpet. I looked around the room, terrified. My room was a disaster. The sheets were in a ball on the floor. My mattress was half off of my bed frame, and my bed was no longer sitting flush with the wall, but pulled off about 3 feet. I looked around for the entity, but it was no longer there. My mother held me tight as I cried on the floor, not knowing what happened, only thinking that it was a really intense nightmare. I spent the rest of that night in my mother's bed, but did not sleep. The next morning, I could see the rug burn on my arms and elbows from being dragged across the carpet. I looked at my ankles to see they were red and swollen, but harder to see were the little scratches along the top of my feet. That was my last night in that house, and I'm glad that it was. To this day, I do not know what this thing was, or what it wanted of me, but thinking of it still scares me. In my adolescent years, and even now that I'm in my mid-20s, I have what my doctor has only described as night terrors. I wake up in the middle of the night to see nothing but darkness. And as I stare into the darkness, I see a figure, even darker than the darkness around it. I still scream when I see the silhouette in the darkness. Now that I'm older though, I have more control over my actions. I take a flashlight and shine it through my room, or I'll turn on a light switch. Many times I'll just wake up screaming, sometimes even running out of my room with no idea why. I do not know if what I see is the same entity that stalked me as a child, or if it's just my imagination digging deep into my subconscious. But the entity still haunts me to this day. I just pray that whatever this is does not start going after my wife or our future kids.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.